Hello YouTube, WJ's Handy Dad here. Today we're going to talk about tracking down your electrical problems. Now before we get started, you have one question to answer in the comments. Does this suit make me look fat? Now, electrical problems are one of the most frustrating things to deal with in a vehicle. It could be something as simple as just a blown fuse, but more often than not you've got a cut wire somewhere. Maybe an animal's chewed through it, or maybe when you bought your car, when they decommissioned it, or what I call downfitted it, they just started cutting wires. Maybe you had hot wires hanging down, touching ground points, etc. I mean, there's lots of different issues. Maybe you have a bad relay or something. But if you have a multimeter, and really you don't have to have one as fancy as this, you can even get a free one at Harbor Freight and they do a pretty good job. So my issue is my fog lights just stopped turning on, and it makes me think it's not the bulbs because all four of them have gone out. So I have two that are fog lights, and I have two that are in the grill that are acting as, you know, extra high beams or driving lights, whatever you want to call it. And they all stopped working at the same time simultaneously. So it's highly unlikely that all four bulbs went bad, but you know, these are LEDs, so when I say bulb, I'm talking about the whole fixture there. I'm not talking about the individual LEDs, but basically what I'm saying is I don't think it's very likely that all four of the bulb fixtures went out at the same time. I mean, obviously that is possible, but that seems to be the least likely. So the first thing I checked was to make sure there was still power at the switch. So what I did is I took this panel off and just hooked up the multimeter to the wire that comes into the switch, and then grounded the other side of the multimeter. And when I turn the key on, since this is accessory powered, I got 12 volts. Turn the key off, it goes away. So I knew I'm getting power to the switch. So then the next question is the switch itself bad? And you know, there's basically two ways you can check that. One way is to take the switch and put the leads of the multimeter on it and just see if there's continuity when the switch is on and no continuity when the switch is off. In my case, since I knew I had the 12 volts coming in, I just checked to make sure there was also 12 volts on the outgoing line. So the problem is not a blown fuse coming to the power source here, and it's not a bad switch here. So that tells me the problem is somewhere either in the wire that goes out to the front, or, like I said, less likely but possible that all four light fixtures just went out at the same time. So I've picked a relatively easily accessible spot. You see I just popped the hood and removed the little plastic shield here. And that gives me access to the relay wiring that controls whether it goes to the fog light section or to the grill light section. So I've got my multimeter set to read. This one has settings where it's 6 or 60 volts. So I put it on 60. Obviously cars are 12 volts. You don't want to do the 6 volt setting, you want to do the 60. Just to show you, we have power at the battery, although you see my battery probably needs to get on the charger. It's 11.79, so it's a little weak. So what I want to do is see if I have power in here, on any of these lines. I don't remember which one's supposed to be hot, so that's showing 6 volts. It should be at 12. I don't know if it's just a bad ground on my multimeter or if I've got something else going on. But that's interesting. See, that one's showing about 0.2. So we decided it was the black wire coming in that's probably the hot wire, but it's only getting about half of what it should. Now, I'm going to show you how you can do a continuity test. Switch it over here, and you see you get no resistance when they're connected. So I want to see which one of these is grounded. I'm thinking it's the white wire, but I'm not 100% sure. So there's a little bit of resistance there. No connection there. And that looks to be the ground, since that's showing perfect continuity there. So the yellow is going to be my ground, and you want to see there's going to be no continuity on that hot wire, even connecting to the positive, because it's accessory power. If I find an accessory source under the hood and touch it, then it should show continuity there. If we switch back to the 12 volt setting, should be able to plug in to the yellow for the ground, and you see we're only getting 6.5, so there's a problem somewhere. I wouldn't think it's the ground itself. Oh, now we're up to 10. Interesting. So it's possibly just something as simple as corrosion in these connectors, since I'm getting varying readings there. And you also notice there's some corrosion on the connectors here. So I'm going to clean these up. This is a relay, for those of you who don't know what that is. So basically, this is like an automatic switch. So what it does is it connects one wire, and when you add power or ground, depending on what's missing, it trips the switch the other way. And so these can be used to connect one input to one of two outputs, or one of two inputs to a single output. It can also just be used, I know some people use it to connect basically where you have a high power source running through here and a low power source to be your switch on and off, or even a ground. So for example, you could have a switch on your dash that grounds, and when it grounds it triggers this to come on. Those are the basic main uses for the relay. I typically use it for one of the first two, like I said, either switching two inputs to one output or one input to two outputs. That's typically what I've always used them for. Okay, I've cleaned these up a little bit, see if that helps anything. One tip, and I neglected to do it when I did this because I really didn't think of this was going to be a wet area, but obviously it is put a little dielectric tune-up grease on your connectors. It's not going to hurt anything, but it will help insulate them from the water, and hopefully avoid the problem of the corrosion. So with the connector on there, I'm still not getting light. So we know we had power, although it was weak. It's between 6 and 10 volts up to here. So that eliminates the wiring from the switch on my dashboard all the way to this point. So that tells me, now keep in mind LED lights sometimes won't trigger unless they have the full 12 volts. So it could just be if I've got a weak power coming from there, that's why the lights aren't coming on too. So I need to see now is, post this switch, do I still have the 6 or 10 volts going through? If I do, then probably need to hook up something directly to the battery just to see if the lights kick on, and if they do, then we know it's a problem in the wire between here and the dash. Maybe there's a little bit of fraying or something where it's not putting the full 12 volts down the line. And that can be a little bit trickier depending on if it's something you've wired yourself or if it's something factory. In my case, the wires for this were wired by me, so they're fairly easy to see the whole way through. My guess would be maybe there's something pinched, since I'm running it up behind that trim piece on the dash. Maybe something got pinched in there when the plastic trim piece was pushed back on or something, and so maybe it's just a little bit broken to where some power's getting through but not the full 12 volts that we need. If you're going to do a lot of testing with your multimeter for voltage, it makes it a lot easier if you get the alligator clip. Now, I normally like to hook this to the ground side, because obviously if I hook this to the ground and it starts touching things, there's not going to be any sparking, whereas if I hook this to the positive, I got to make sure this doesn't touch anything. So the other thing you can do with the alligator clip is connect it to there and then touch it to your hot. Now obviously you have to be very careful that you don't let this slip and that you don't hold this on here for very long, just in case. And I'm just going to see if the lights kick on when I touch this, or if I get a spark. I'm getting nothing, so it's possible this isn't making contact in there. Yep, I'm getting light there. So that tells me we got a problem between this black wire and the switch. So like I said, the switch has 12 volts. This black wire here does not. So now I just got to trace the wire. And again, I'm going to use the most common sense. Where is it most likely to be damaged? It's most likely to be damaged somewhere where it's going to get pinched, kicked, broken, that sort of thing. I'm going to assume it's not an animal chewed through it, although that's always a possibility. Like I said, the most likely points are going to be behind the dash trim, where it may get kind of a fold like this and, you know, get pinched really hard when you push the trim in. Coming through the firewall, maybe it got rubbed through the insulation or something. It's also possible it's just a bad wire. Maybe it's gotten corroded somewhere. Maybe I didn't do a really good solder point. Maybe I used a crimp connection. I honestly don't remember. So I'll just start looking for those sorts of problems. But at least I've now isolated it where I know it's between here and the dash. And I'll just look at the wire. Like I said, since I installed it, I kind of know where it goes. So you see down there, that clear gold wire is the hot wire. And so probably what I want to do is see over here somewhere if there's any issues, and then if it's still bad there, then I'll go up through the firewall and where it's coming into the car, check it there as well. It's also possible that the switch is bad and not putting out the 12 volts on the other side of the switch. I need to double check that again, just make sure there's full continuity on the switch. Okay, yesterday when I checked all this, I'm getting different results than I'm getting right now. So you see right now it's showing 12 volts on there with the accessory power, but then it'll jump around. I've seen it spit out as low as 8. So that tells me there's something wrong with my source here, not a blown fuse, because a blown fuse it would just show 0. But I can't tell if it's just the crimp here is bad, or if it's something from here back into there. But again, it's just a matter of tracing the wire. So if I pull this trim piece off, the wire goes back into there and down into, there's a police connector underneath the glove box area. and that's where it's connected to. My guess is I probably just used a spade connector or some sort of really bad splice rather than soldering it in, and that's probably the cause of me having grief now, because this has worked forever. It just recently started screwing up, but it's getting all sorts of weird voltages. I mean, that's basically not stopping at any one level. It's going up and down, up and down. The other thing that I did was, you see I've kind of made these where I can add more switches. So this one is hot all the time. This is battery power. When I hook that to there, the fog lights come right on. So that's when I decided that it wasn't a problem from the wire here to the lights, it was the source. And like I said, that's different than what I was getting yesterday. And then, like I said, the other thing you could do if you thought maybe it was the switch is you could just hook the wires together temporarily to see, or if you put your multimeter and you want to disconnect the switch, obviously put the multimeter leads on each pole of the switch and see if you have continuity when the switch is on and no continuity when the switch is off. And if you're getting kind of weak continuity, that would tell you it's a bad switch. But here it's not a problem with the switch, it's a problem with the power source. So I will, like I said, my guess is it's either a bad crimp right here or at the point of origin, which is underneath that little kick panel under the glove box where the police wires are. I probably did a really crappy job connecting it because I was probably in a hurry and it was probably late at night, and you know how it goes. But anyway, so that will be my two most likely culprits, and if it's neither of those, then like I said, my next choice would be somewhere behind here. It's gotten pinched just to the point where the wire inside the insulation is damaged enough where it's maybe not making full contact. But that's probably unlikely because it's not like I was working behind here and all of a sudden the problem happened. So like I said, most likely it's going to be at the source or here. So I don't think it's the crimp because I put it on the other side. So now it's hooked directly to the wire and we're still getting crazy readings. And just to give you an idea, the difference when I plug it onto the full-time hot wire, which is a completely different source, you see it's just stable, 13.25. And the reason it's reading 13.25 is because I put the battery charger on the car. Since it was reading below 12 volts, I didn't want to come out to a dead battery tomorrow. And as I suspected, it is a bad connection. So these little tap-in things are notorious for failing. Just the vibration of the car over time, I think it just loosens them. So me messing with this, I can make the lights go on and off. So one nice thing I do for myself is I tape them yellow when they're accessory power. And so, but I also trace this back to the original police wire, which is this one right here, that's the tan, and that's got a good solder on it. So what I need to do here is pull this one off and basically solder it into this wire so that that problem won't happen again. So that's what I'm going to do. Like I said, these things, they're real convenient when you're just snapping something together quickly, but they just don't seem to hold up. So this is the wire we're going to solder into here. I'm going to try to put it exactly where it was so I don't have any additional cuts in this wire, because I'm not going to be able to slip a heat shrink over it. So what you do is take your wire stripper over the wire like that, and you just try to strip out a little section. Remember, it's going to retract, so you want to do more than what you actually need, because once you let go, it's going to retract. You see it gives me a little gap there. And then the one that I'm going to solder in I want to take enough off of there that I can wrap it around there. So a little bit more. And that should be enough to actually wrap around there. So I'm just going to twist that around and keep twisting and twisting until it's basically one solid wire here. Now I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to go ahead and test this before I solder, just to make sure that I have connection there and that those lights are coming on. Right now there's no power to it, and I have lights and they don't flicker when I move that, so I got a good connection there. I'm going to take a little bit of flux, put on there, and that will clean the wire, heat up, let me know that the soldering iron is heating it up, and it should make the solder melt into there really well. Next thing I'm going to do, since I'm doing this in the car, I'm going to go ahead and put this towel under it, just because when I do this, some of that flux may melt off of there. Get my solder ready to go so that I can do this quickly. Soldering iron should be heated up already. It is. So we'll just heat the wire and touch the solder to the wire. You don't want to touch the solder to the soldering iron and try to drip it on there. You want to melt it in so that's all one piece. So like I said, you can't really do a heat shrink on there, so I'm going to have to put tape over that. And I'll go ahead and use my yellow tape so that I know that that is accessory power, and I'm going to spritz that with alcohol so that the tape will stick, because the flux could potentially keep the tape from sticking. So I wanted to show you a couple things off the vehicle. So if you're testing to see if a wire has continuity, I've just got a little piece of wire here, and just for convenience I put the alligator clip on the one side so I don't have to hold the leads on both of them. But when you have a good wire, you see the continuity will show very little resistance. So ideally you want it as close to zero as possible. If you connected this and it's showing this, then you know you've got a break somewhere between this point and this point. So like if you have a wire like this in your car, it's reasonable to conclude that the break could be just here at your crimp point. So you might also run your test lead here just to see. So here, we have continuity of both sides, so we got a good crimp here. But if you had a break here but a good connection there, then you would know you just had a bad crimp. The other thing is testing your switches. Again, I'm just going to connect the alligator lead just to make this a little bit easier. So right now you see the switch is off and there's no continuity. When I flip the switch, you should have continuity. So if you had a bad switch when you switched it, it would still look like that, or it might show a bunch of resistance. I mean, I've had them where they're failing and there's just a bunch of resistance. So in this case, like you might have a 12-volt source on here, but going out is only 6 volts or something, and that'd be an indication that you just need to replace the switch. The other thing you can do is, if you don't have a multimeter handy and you're just checking for voltage, you could set up some sort of test light And so basically you'd want to ground the ground lead of the light, and then assuming you're looking for hot wire, and then like this wire's hot, so when I touch it you get light. You see a couple of the LEDs are burned out, but or conversely, if you hook this to hot and you're looking for ground, you have basically the same thing, just which lead are you connecting. So that's another trick if you have a light handy. You also want to remember with LEDs, they are generally, because they're a diode, going to be sensitive. So you see it doesn't work when you hook it up in reverse. It only lights up. So they're polarized. Whereas if you have just a regular incandescent bulb, you can hook it up either way. So LEDs are not necessarily a good for using as a test light because of that polarity issue. Anyway, I'm glad that was a successful fix. Those of you who have Crown Vics know that the headlights that come with it are just not good enough by themselves, and even with me having the LED headlight conversion, it's a lot better, but it's still not enough. So I really missed not having the fog lights working. Hope this video was helpful. Really appreciate a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and please tell your friends about my channel. Thank you very much.